Well, I'm delighted today that I have a guest here, Ray Morrison. He's become a friend over the last year, having moved up from Hamilton. And Ray has a story which is a little bit outside the normal Canadian nuclear story, but it's related to us. And we must remember that the Canadian nuclear program, we began here in Montreal, and then it moved to Chalk River, and it was for development of the atomic bomb during World War II. And we assisted the Manhattan Project a little bit. We really didn't provide them much information really that they weren't already gaining. But a lot of our, a lot of people working in the Montreal project as it was were British. They came over here and with quite a few French refugee scientists and some other refugee scientists from Nazi-occupied Europe. And they moved across in 1943 and 44 mainly, with some Canadian scientists being involved. It was all run by the National Research Council of Canada. And so there's this great cooperation between Canada and Britain in particular. And so that's the hook in with this program, because what we have here is that, Ray, you were very involved on perhaps an average Joe kind of level with what developed out of the project here. In Canada, we did not pursue nuclear weapons, but a lot of the British scientists and the French as well, they went back to their respective countries and they began their own atomic programs, which were mainly focused on
weapons.
Weapons, that's right. And in fact, interestingly enough, as the British developed their atomic weapons, they were looking for a place to test them. The British did not want to test their weapons in Britain, for obvious reasons. They didn't have enough space there. And so they were looking for a place, preferably in the Commonwealth. They actually looked at testing them in Nevada with the American testing site. But there were disagreements with the Americans on who would have what information, et cetera. And so the British decided they would choose between Canada and Australia. And they were considering Churchill, Manitoba for the Canadian testing area. But that didn't carry through eventually, and they decided on Australia. So that's the background to this story and this interview. So Ray, how about you start by telling us about yourself, where you were born and all that kind of thing.
Okay, I was actually born in London, but moved a couple of years later to a little village in Surrey called Hook. And that was a village that had been there for hundreds of years. Anyway, obviously the war broke out when I was a youngster, and my dad went off to the army and disappeared for literally 5 years. And that left my mother with 3 young children. And so I joined the Boy Scouts group and started learning all kinds of things there, which in fact proved invaluable to me when I eventually got sent into the armed services. And as you know, anybody at the age of 18 in Britain at that time automatically had to be conscripted, and I was asked what I wanted to be, and I told them I wanted to be in the Air Force. So of course when my orders came through, they had sent me to the Royal Marines, which was something I had never even thought of. But anyway, I ended up at Lympstone, which is the Royal Marine Centre, and 12 weeks of infantry training, and then I went to the commando school, passed out there and I got my commando ticket, and then they put me on a list because we were going to Malaya to fight the communists out there. Mm-hmm. And the 42 Commando was already out there. So...
what years was this then?
This would have been, oh boy,
It's all post-war, of course, but
Yes, oh yes. Yeah, this was all after the war. I was 18 when I joined, and so that would be 51.
okay. Okay.
So anyway, I joined the Marines, and then when I'd finished my infantry training, they suddenly decided that they needed me to become a mechanic as well. So they sent me to the school there, and I spent another, I think, 8 weeks learning how to drive all kinds of vehicles and also how to do some mechanical work on them. And then I was put back on the list to go to Malaya, and on the morning that we were supposed to be parading to go, they decided that they wanted a number of volunteers. And of course, one of the things you very quickly learn in the services is you don't volunteer for anything. And so we all stood there like dummies. So they decided to read off a number of names, and of course I was one of them. And I then ended up going to the amphibious school. Now I was a very good swimmer, so I been swimming for a couple of clubs and that sort of thing, and so I thought, well, this is great, you know. It turned out I wasn't actually swimming; I was learning to drive a landing craft. So I then got very accustomed to the landing craft, and that was another 6 weeks. And then at the end of that, I was back ready to go to Malaya. And then once again, they called us out on parade and wanted volunteers. And once again, we all stood there. So they rattled off, I think, 15 names or something. And of course, I was one of them. And so they said, just report to the guardhouse with your belongings in, you've got an hour, sort of thing. So we sort of rushed back to our lodgings and grabbed everything and got back. And then they threw us in the back of a truck. We had no idea where we were going or anything, and took us out to the railway station in Portsmouth. And then next minute we were in London, and then we were on a train, and we ended up in Glasgow. And then we were on a truck, and we went to the Gairloch, which of course is the area outside Glasgow leading into the Clyde, where the British Navy uses as a resting place for their various ships. And, we were shown this landing ship, an LST, and there it was, HMS Tracker. And that was my ship. So next minute we were working on the ship to get it cleaned up because it had been sitting there since the war. And so this was like 4 years later or whatever, and 5 years later, and it was in not very good shape, to put it bluntly. So we had to fix it up and do a lot of work on it. And then we set sail, and off we went, and still had absolutely no idea where we were going or what we were doing, because they'd never said that we were going to Malaya, and I couldn't imagine going all the way to Malaya in this landing ship, And
So this is a large landing craft?
So this is a ship that is capable of carrying tanks and all kinds of things. So they have these huge doors that open and a ramp that comes down, and of course obviously everybody goes out. The incredible thing about them is, of course, that they have a very low requirement for depth of water.
Yes.
So a ship like that can actually float in about 10 feet of water. And of course the idea is that when you run in up on the beach, you run right in on the beach, drop your, or as far as you can anyway, and then you drop everything and out goes the machinery. And then of course the ship will rise up a bit, which will enable you to withdraw. So anyway, we got on board this ship and off we went. And then when we got out to sea, the captain announced over the radio, where I guess you've all been wondering, where we're going. So we're going to Australia on Britain's first atomic bomb expedition. No, I'm sorry, he didn't say that at all. He didn't say that. I'm sorry, I forgot the little story I wanted to tell you.
About the lad?
About the lad.
Yes.
Yeah. Before all this happened, I was on guard one day at the end of the jetty, and I had a rifle, and I'm standing there, and some little boy came up, and he must have been about 6 or 7, and he looked up at me and he said, "Hey, mister," and I looked at him, and he said, "Are you from the tracker?" And I thought, how the heck would he know that I was from the tracker? I mean, we're talking of an area where there were probably 50 ships in this, place. I mean, it was packed with ships. And so I looked at him and I said, "What's it to you?" And he said, he ignored me completely and just said, "Do you know where you're going?" And I looked at him and I thought, how the heck would he know where I'm going,
Yeah.
So he said, "You don't know, do you?" Because I guess he saw the look on my face. And I said, I said, "Oh, so you know, do you?" He said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "If you give me sixpence, I'll tell you where you're going." Well, sixpence was actually, like, I got a shilling a day back then, so that was half of a day's pay. And I looked at him and I said, "You cheeky little monkey." And I suggested he took off, but I used a rather nasty word actually to him, and he said, "No, come on, mister." He said, I know where you're going." And I said, "Well, how would you know?" And he said, "Well, my dad is the superintendent of the shipyard." And I looked at him and I thought, so I pulled out my sixpence and handed it to him, and I said, "Okay, where am I going?" And I said, "I tell you, if you try to run without telling me, I'm going to shoot you," I said to him. Of course, I had no intention of doing anything like that, but anyway, so he looked at me, and he was quite a tough little kid, and he went like this, and he said, "You're going to Australia on Britain's first atomic bomb expedition." And I was absolutely stunned. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I looked at him and I said, "Where'd you get that from?" And he said, "I'm just telling you, So then he ran off.
Yeah.
So, of course, when I got back on board the ship, I was dying to tell the guys, and I thought, oh, God, they're going to just think I'm crazy, Mm-hmm. So eventually, later that day, I said, "Hey, guys, you won't believe where we're going." And so they all looked at me, and they said, "How do you know?" And I said, "Oh, someone told me."
Yes, someone. Yeah.
I didn't say a little kid at this point. So I said, "We're apparently heading for Australia on Britain's first atomic bomb expedition," and they all went, "Oh God, Morrison, where the heck did you get that? You idiot," sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I didn't dare tell them I got it from a little boy, so I left it at that, and that was it. So anyway, we set sail, and sure enough, the captain came on and said exactly that. "That's where you're going," and we were all amazed because we had no idea that Britain was even planning on setting off a bomb, in Australia. And anyway, we went the usual route for traffic back in those days, which was Gibraltar, Malta, Suez, Aden, Colombo, Trincomalee, and we stopped at all those ports. So when we got to Ceylon, which was, as it was then, I think it's Sri Lanka now, we stopped there and picked up more supplies from the old naval station at Trincomalee, and then we set off across the Indian Ocean to Australia. we got out there and then ran into a terrible storm. And I mean, our ship was rolling. We were doing like a 25-degree roll, and we had a deck cargo, and our landing craft were up on davits. So the whole thing was kind of top heavy, and it was very frightening, believe me.
So you were carrying smaller landing craft on your bigger landing.
Yeah, and they have davits, so they just swing them out and then drop them over the side, and then bang, off you go. Anyway, we got some severe damage to our bow doors. The bow doors were literally breaking off, so they had to put a hawser around it, a steel hawser, and do a jerry job on it. And then we carried on straight to Australia, to Fremantle, where we had to immediately get some repairs done. So we spent several days in Fremantle, and then set off from there up the west coast. And it's about 890 miles, I think, to the Montebello Islands, and that's where we were heading. And the Montebello Islands is a huge, circle of islands with a lagoon in the middle. And the lagoon was only like 20 to 30 foot deep, but it was absolutely stunning. You could see the bottom. The water was so clear there. And when we got there, we immediately noticed that there was some buildings like sheds and that sort of thing on some of the islands. And clearly the Australian Army had been involved in setting these up, because none of us had been there. And so HMS Plym, which was the frigate carrying the bomb, was already there, because they had gone a completely different route to us, because they didn't want to go through the canal with the bomb. So they didn't take the bomb through the Suez Canal. They went the long route right the way around. And but they had started off ahead of us, obviously. So the Plym was there, and it was anchored literally right in the middle of the lagoon. And so we got anchored and then started our daily routine of taking scientists. There were a whole bunch of scientists already there. And we had to ferry them from island to island, because they had things set up on all the different islands to register, I guess, the effect of the bomb. And so that was like a constant daily thing for us for days on end. And then we had a great thing happen, because I should mention to you that food on board our ship was just terrible. I mean, we hadn't seen any fresh food for literally months. Everything was canned or bottled or whatever, and the food was just gross. One day we went to one of the islands to take some scientists there, and there were piles and piles of boxes there, and we looked at them, and they all contained food. But when I say food, I'm talking of like things like salmon and peaches and cream and all kinds of things like that. And we were absolutely stunned. We thought, wow, So of course, being devious, we thought, this is one way of getting some half-decent food. Yeah. So we grabbed we opened up the cases, took a bunch out and put them in our landing craft in the bilges. And so after that, for days on end, we had some pretty nice food. Anyway, the time came when the bomb was going to go off, and they needed one landing craft to take a single scientist out to the Plym, obviously to do some final checking.
So the bomb was actually on board the frigate, the Plym?
Oh, it had been there all the way, all the time from London, from England.
And they were leaving it on board when they blew up the bomb?
Oh, yes, yeah, the whole thing went up.
Yeah,
and so we got elected to take him out there, and in the meantime, all the ships pulled out to sea, and I mean, we're talking of a whole flotilla of ships. So I think there were 5 British ships, but there were probably 10 or 11 Australian ships out there as well, including an aircraft carrier. And anyway, we took the scientist out to the ship, out to the Plymouth, and then took him over to one of the islands where the scientists had a concrete shelter, and it was hidden. I mean, you literally couldn't see it, but it was deep into the rock. They had blasted rock and everything to make this thing. And so we dropped him off, and then we started out to sea.
So he would have stayed there when they detonated the bomb in this observation?
Oh, no. We were supposed to go back to our ship.
No, but the scientists were staying in this
Oh,
shop.
yes, yeah.
Okay.
There were a number of scientists that stayed right there.
Okay.
But we had to get back out to our ship. Now, the ship was 15 miles out, and you've got to understand that those landing craft do about 8 knots.
And this is one of these small landing craft now.
Yes, this is a small one.
Yeah, right.
So we started out, and immediately a storm blew up. And this was an area where storms seemed to suddenly just appear. And this storm blew up, and we were shipping water right over the bow of our little landing craft. And there was no way we were going to make it to the ship. I mean, we would have sunk because the bailing thing on a landing craft was a hand crank pump, just one.
Yes.
And there's no way you could keep up with that. So anyway, we radioed in and said, look, you know, we're in trouble here. We're going to sink if we keep going, so we've got to turn around. You know, what do you want us to do? And they said, well, just go to the nearest island and get out of the boat and sit down on the ground, and we'll give you more instructions when you get there. You know, you radio us. So we went there and got to one of the islands there and got up onto the rocks. They were just rocky outcrops. I mean, when we're talking of islands, I'm talking of like just piles of rock really sticking up out of the sea in many cases. There were some bigger islands, but some of them were quite small. And we were on one of the smaller ones, really. But it happened to be the closest to where we were. So we got out anyway and climbed up on the rocks and sat down on the rocks and waited. We radioed in and said, okay, we're here. And they said, okay, well, when we start doing the timing down, we will let you know, and we want you to sit on the ground with your backs to the bomb and just close your eyes.
So there was no thought that they would stop the countdown and let you guys return?
No, they made it very, very clear there was to be no, because they had already, it was originally going to be set off the day before, and they couldn't because of the bad weather. And then they had a day of what appeared to be good weather, and they decided to get it in quick, you know. So that's what happened there. So anyway, they got to the countdown, and you know, the usual thing that we've all seen, 10, 9, 8, 7, you know. And then we got to 1, and there was a sort of just a second where sort of nothing seemed to happen. And one of the guys, who was a Cockney on board my ship, he said, the effing thing is, and he was just about to say a dud, when suddenly there was this giant, I mean, we had our eyes closed, and I saw this giant flash, and I had my back to the bomb. So I thought, wow, you know. And then this voice was screaming on the radio, okay, you can look now, you can look now. And of course we turned round, and there was this cloud roaring up in the typical shape of the atom bombs that you've seen before, you know, the mushroom shape. And but instead of just a cloud of, this thing was burning every colour under the sun. And I immediately, I thought, wow, you know, like, there were reds and greens, and, you know, and I don't know whether that was the ship burning up, because of course it blew up the whole ship. But I would love to see a colour photograph of that. I've never seen one, so I don't know. But I swear there was all kinds of colour in that bomb.
I've heard that, yes. Yes.
So in the meantime, I should have mentioned that they had decided to send in a bigger landing craft, which is an LCM, a landing craft mechanical, which is capable of carrying a couple of trucks. And it has a much bigger front bow, and you know, it will withstand a lot more bad water. So they had sent that in. So there were now 8 of us stuck on this little island.
Okay.
And when the bomb went off.
Yeah.
So then, of course, the voice was yelling at us, "Get out of there!" So we didn't need any other words. We just jumped on board the other boat, and I went down to the engine room because that's what I did. I looked after the engines in the landing craft, and so I went down there, and we started heading out, and we weren't going fast enough for my feelings. So I said to the other guy, the accelerators, as it were in fact handles that you pulled down. And when you got to the bottom, there was a little thing stuck out where it stopped. But you could actually pull the handle out and go past it, and then go past that stop and get more speed. And I knew this because I'd obviously driven the landing craft. So I said to the other guy, "Come on, let's get this damn thing out of here." So he did the same as me. We pulled the handles down and pushed it down, and we got out of there. And so we got back to our ship and HMS Tracker, and so that was it for the time being. And then, of course, a few days later, just I think probably 2 or 3 days later, we were back, taking the scientists back to the various islands and that. And I also went right over where the ship had been, where the Plym had been, and there was just a crater with, like, it looked like the stuff that comes out of a furnace. The rock had sort of molten. It was the most incredible picture, actually, of looking down, because the water was absolutely clear. You could just see it, you know. And whoa. So anyway, we did our job, taking people around and that, and then about a day or 2 later, one of our landing craft that was tied up alongside the ship suddenly sank overnight. And fortunately, the water there wasn't very deep. I mean, it's probably 30, 40 feet out, even out there. So they sent a couple of divers down, and they hooked up onto it and pulled it up on the davits and stuck it on the upper deck. And then the water was draining out, and once it had drained out, I got volunteered to help clean out the bilges, because there was a lot of sand and silt in there. And you'd have to know what the bilges look like in a landing craft, but they're very small pieces. It's in sections. So it was very difficult to get any kind of shovel or anything in there. And we came up with a brilliant idea of, back then, cigarettes came in 50 cigarettes into a round tin. And
yes.
there were lots of those tins floating around. So basically what we did, we got a tin and flattened one side of it so that it was now like a scoop. So we sat there with buckets in the bottom of the ship there and was scraping this stuff out. And I'd spent a whole day doing that, and then the next day I was back again, doing it again, and one of the scientists came strolling over on the upper deck and looked at me and said, what are you doing? And I told him, and he looked at me and he saw that I had a film badge on it, because we all wore film badges. And he said to me, when was your film badge last checked? And I looked at him and I almost started laughing. I said, it's never been checked. And he said, what? And I said, no, it's never been checked. And he had I guess it was a Geiger counter with him, which he suddenly switched it on anyway, and this thing just went wild. And he said, get out of there, you know. And I climbed out of the bilges there, and he said, report to the sick bay right now. So I went down there, and the doc had a look at me and everything, and I felt fine. I hadn't noticed anything, but they took me off duty for, I guess, 4 or 5 days anyway. And at that time, I was feeling fine. So I went back, and we were doing our thing again, taking the scientists around, and then eventually, of course, we finished our chores there. And we, in the meantime, I should also explain that every time we went out on one of the islands, when we came back to the ship, HMS Tracker had become what was known as the Anyway, it was set up so that there were showers all the way along one side on the upper deck, and on the other side there were these machines where you stepped into a booth and you pushed your arms into two holes, and it registered, I guess, what you were on the register. So
it was the showers were for decontamination, and then the monitors to measure the radiation.
Exactly. You had soap and everything, and scrub brushes. And I can remember after I went into after I'd been scooping this stuff out, they immediately made me go and shower, and I came back and then went into the machine. I had to go back 5 times to re-scrub myself before they were satisfied that I was, reasonably okay. But 5 times, and my hands were just absolutely raw, and my arms, because I didn't have anything on my arms. I mean, I was wearing a T-shirt and a pair of shorts, Anyway, that's that part of the story, I guess. Then when we set sail, we had to go back to Fremantle, and when we got to Fremantle, we got quite a surprise, because the local Anglican minister came aboard and said that he wanted to thank us all for coming to Australia, etc., etc. And he said, look, I would love you to come to our service on Sunday. This was like on Friday. And he said, we would love to have you come to the church and meet all of our parishioners. And he said, we have an all-girls choir of 25, and he said they would love to meet with you and mix with you, and I think you would find it great to meet them. And he sort of kept on this. Well, of course, we hadn't seen a woman in about 4 months at this point. So, and I was 19 years of age, let me explain. So I thought this sounded great. I would love to go and see the choir girls, So, of course, we got to the church, and we were all sitting down, and then it started, and the choir came walking in. Well, I probably don't have to tell you, but the choir, I think there was no one under the age of 45 or 50. And at that point, a bunch of the guys said, oh, and they got up to leave. Well, of course, our Sergeant Major was standing at the back of the church.
Yeah.
And they got up out of the pews and started to leave, and he said, sit down. So So, of course, they all sat down, and that was it. Well, you had to go through the service, which was great, actually. I mean, it really was. And they then had this wonderful meal afterwards. I mean, they had really set things up. And I met some great people, and it was just great. I mean, I was invited back to someone's home, and I had to tell them that I already had a relative who lived in Fremantle.
Oh, okay.
So I managed to get to see them. Now, it was a distant relative. It was my grandmother's sister's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, so yeah, it was. And then, of course, we set sail and came back, and we got as far as Gibraltar, so we were just almost home now, and they suddenly announced that the king had died.
Ah.
And so we were immediately, we weren't supposed to be sailing for a couple of days, but they immediately set sail for London, and they came in, dumped all the Marines off, and we were immediately sent to some deep shelter under one of the parks in London. And once again, they never tell you what you're doing or where you're going. I mean, this was sort of one of those things, you know, like, obviously we're doing something here. And it then turned out that what we were going to be doing was we were going to be lining the road outside the palace. So we had to sort of line up the road on one side. We had the Marines on one side, and the guards, all the guards regiments were on the other side. So that's what I ended up doing, resting on my arms, etc., when all the people came through. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it was quite incredible from the point of view that every time an ambassador or someone from a king from another country came through, and there were dozens of them, we had to do the royal salute to them, you see. So we weren't exactly just standing there doing nothing. We were fairly busy initially. And then, of course, when they went to the church, we still had to wait because they were coming back. So we were standing there, I think, for something like 5 hours. Oh, okay. And yeah, that was a long day. But they had trained us for it, because as soon as we got to London, one of the first things they did was take us out onto the park, and we would just stand there for hours on end, holding our rifles, mm-hmm. and just doing absolutely nothing but just standing there. And that can get pretty tough after a while, you know. It's amazing, actually, how... and the other thing was that in the guards, there were a lot of the guards that were fainting. Mm. I mean, they were in full uniform,
yes.
Dress uniform.
Bearskin hats, yeah.
Bearskin hats and everything. So... but there were a number of them that fainted, and our Sergeant Major was walking up and down behind our ranks, and he said, "Don't you dare do anything like that. You're a Royal Marine." And he was giving us all the old routine about being a Marine. So anyway, that's about it.
So that was the end of your atomic cruise, was to come back for the King's funeral.
Exactly,
then. Yeah.
exactly.
Oh, yes.
And that ended my 2 years in the services, because I was only in there for 2 years.
Right, yes.
So literally to the day, it was quite incredible, actually, because they basically said to me, "Okay, you can go home." But I was still in effect on duty for 2 months after you leave the services, that you were still on the record for 2 months, so they can call you back if for any reason they needed you.
Okay.
So you can't go back to your original job or anything for 2 months.
Okay.
So I ended up working on buildings, climbing up ladders, doing all kinds of other things, just to earn some money. That was all. Mm-hmm. So yeah. So.
Back to your story of the atomic blast itself, and how far do you think you were from the actual epicenter?
We were probably, It was probably 4 miles, I think. You know, I mean, I really have no real idea.
You were close then.
Yeah, we were certainly close enough, believe me, because when we went back a few days later, my landing craft was sitting up. When we went off onto the islands immediately after the bomb had gone off, our clothing basically consisted of a cotton coverall that had a double leg from the knee down and a double arm from here. Now, of course, most of us weren't wearing anything underneath them anyway, so because it was a hot area, and so basically we just wore this, and we had no masks of any kind, and we had gloves. They gave us gloves to wear, which were rubber, and they were so cumbersome that it was absolutely impossible to operate anything. So, you know, if you were trying to operate a control in an engine room, which is what my job was, I had to take the gloves off to do it. So, I mean, eventually, of course, you just get so fed up with them, you just throw them on one side and that's it. So, you know, I must admit that looking back now, I obviously think that, you know, we should have had masks and things like that, which were never supplied. And it's no wonder that in a lot of the subsequent tests that were done, there were a lot of people that suffered, you know, radioactivity problems. So, yeah. I don't know, but hey, it's done and gone now.
Yeah,
so.
okay, yeah. Certainly, yeah. With in many respects, it was the times were then. You know, it was a different view, and it was also military, but really a lack of preparation for protective equipment. You know,
Yes.
And the Australian Australia was used for quite many more tests, but not. I don't know if any more were done in the Montebello Islands.
Yes, they were.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yeah. Plus, I can't remember the name of the place, Mar or something.
Yes, in the desert inside. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they've set off several in Australia, and of course one of the deals I think they made with Australia was that they would supply Australia with all of the details of the effect of the bomb, etc., etc. So, because I can't imagine Australia would have allowed it to happen without that.
Yeah, that. I think you're right. There was this sort of a bit of a conflict of who got what information. Britain and America were sharing things generally, and Canada was part of that agreement.
Right.
Dating back to the Quebec Conference of 1943. And there were some subsequent changes because the Americans actually, after World War II, really didn't want to share anything with anyone. That's why the British pursued their own program.
Yes.
But another thing was that because of this agreement, Britain couldn't really share information it had received from America. But now, if they themselves generated the information, they could share it with whomever they want, including, I'm sure, Australia.
Right.
And so.
Yeah.
Oh, it makes for a very interesting facet of our nuclear history. And I'm glad Canada didn't pursue nuclear weapons itself. We relied on the Americans, frankly, to protect us, so to speak. But, now, you were saying about the scientist who was told you to go and get out of there and go get decontaminated and checked.
Right.
Did you have any consequences yourself with and your colleagues?
Well, some of my colleagues certainly did in later days. In fact, a whole bunch of them sued the government. Mm-hmm. I didn't know anything about this because in the meantime, I spent the next couple of years in Britain, but then I decided to emigrate. And I wanted to go back to Australia because I really liked Australia. It was warm and everything. But my mother pled with me not to go all that far, because to her, Australia was the other end of the earth, which
Yes,
of course
yes,
it was.
Yes, that's right.
So anyway, I came to Canada instead, and I've certainly never regretted that. I've had a wonderful life here in Canada. I've lived all over Canada. I've lived in, obviously, all over in different places in Ontario, but I've also lived in Calgary and in Vancouver, and travelled a lot in my job and everything. So, yes, I've had a wonderful time here, and in 4 days' time I'm going to be 92. So,
Very good. Very
so
good.
I guess it couldn't have had too much effect on
Well,
me.
evident, yeah. But you're saying some of your colleagues actually, sued the government over.
Oh, and they actually got a judgment after about 20 years, I think. But they eventually, the government eventually decided to make a payment to them. And of course, at that point, my brother, who's 2 years older than me, wrote to me and said, did you know about this? And I said, no. And he said, well, here's the name of the solicitor. And he gave me the name. So I contacted them, and they said, oh, you're too late. Apparently, if I had had just my name in there, I didn't have to prove anything, apparently. All you had to do was have your name on the list. So I don't quite know how that all worked out, but it doesn't matter. What the heck.
Yeah.
So there you go. So that's my little story.
Well, that's a wonderful recount of your story. That's really very interesting. For literally you're on the ground or on the water there at this atomic test, which I'm glad it happened in Australia, not here. And apparently, the proposal for using Churchill site actually they would have done a lot more ecological damage there. They think anyway,
Right.
Because of all the wetlands around there. Apparently, Churchill area was not chosen because the water was too shallow, and I guess for bringing in the fleet of larger ships.
Right.
This was part of the reason that they gave, but also that they apparently the British authorities preferred the Australian weather.
I don't blame them there.
They felt it was going to be better, and also it was something I think. Now this happened in October,
Yes,
I believe. Yeah,
that's right.
And apparently that was the reasonably storm-free time of the year, but evidently it wasn't.
No, we had a couple of storms within a few days there, and so I never did finish actually the story about when the mushroom cloud went up, and then when it got up to, like a fair height, like we were looking up like this, and suddenly the wind caught the centre of it, and it started making it into like a Z. And I've actually seen pictures since of the cloud. I mean, I remember it the way I saw it, but it looked like there were two levels of wind almost, because it actually cut the cloud, so it was no longer like that mushroom. And that happened quite quickly, within certainly within a minute, I think. It happened.
Okay.
So, and I think if you looked at photographs of the bomb, you can see that the way it blew.
I believe I've seen it referred to as more, rather than the mushroom cloud shape, it was a cauliflower they referred to it, or something like that.
Well, initially it looked like, from where I was sitting, like the mushroom, it went up exactly like that. But then, as I say, it got cut with the wind.
I see. Okay.
So,
and also I read somewhere that the British wanted to do this test. First of all, to prove that their weapon worked,
right.
And actually they were happy in some ways that it wasn't done in Nevada, where they had been proposing doing it as well. They were trying to get the Americans to allow them to test it there, But one comment was that they were glad it wasn't in Nevada, because what if it had been a dud? You know, then they would have been embarrassed. You know, whereas
Exactly.
here was more secret. Anyway, some of the stories on it are available online, which is quite interesting. But yours gives a really personal account. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, Ray.
It's my pleasure.
Oh, it's been a delight hearing it. So,
well, I was lucky. I survived without
Yes.
any problems, so good.
good. And I'm very glad you were here to tell us your story as well. So
Thank you
that's
very
great.
much,
Thank you.
Morgan. It's great meeting you again.
Yeah.